Why do you not point out at all that the RK model is outdated? Why don't you point out that a life history paradigm is the new updated scientific consensus? And it does take things from the RK model, but more updated. It's more up to 2017.
Yes, the brand new model, very updated, very strong new model, better for current year, yes? Okay, so V doesn't know the difference between RK selection and life history. As you'll see at the end, that distinction doesn't even exist. V doesn't know what he's talking about at all. He's faking it. He's just doing the authority jam down, and it's something he likes to do a lot. He's really hard up on the journal system, which is called peer review.
He did publish a book that wasn't peer reviewed as far as I know, and their findings, unlike J. Phillip, are published in peer reviewed literature. You know why? He didn't publish it in a peer reviewed literature. That's why.
Now, given how much he likes to say scientist and scientific, why not investigate the validity of this
peer-reviewed literature
that he imagines to be oh so scientific? There was one experiment looking at two journals where the researchers presented two fake papers on the effect of an antibiotic after surgery. The two papers presented were exactly the same in every regard except for the results. The paper that showed a positive effect of the antibiotic had a 97% acceptance rate, and the paper that showed a negative result or no effect of the antibiotic after surgery only had an 80% acceptance rate. But in terms of errors found, reviewers at the two journals found 85% of the errors in the paper that had negative results or no result from the antibiotic, but only found 41% of the error in the paper that showed positive results. Again, these papers are completely identical except for the final results. Another fake paper experiment was done on the effects of positive reinforcement on long-term behavior modification. The popular theory in the field at the time was that reinforcement increases a behavior in the long run, even after the reinforcement is removed, with the minority view being that positive reinforcement actually decreases that behavior in the long run, as external reinforcement undermines intrinsic valuation of the behavior. Reviewers were presented with two papers that were identical in every way except for the results. The paper showing that reinforcement helped the behavior long term was rated to have a better methodology, better data presentation, better scientific contribution rating, and a better summary recommendation for publication. There was another experiment where the authors took published papers in a journal and then resubmitted those papers. But the twist was that the names of the authors and associated universities were less prestigious, but otherwise they were the exact same papers. 92% of the time, the resubmitted paper was not detected as already having been in that journal. Only 8% of the time were the duplicates detected. Of those papers that were not recognized as duplicates, 87% were rejected and 13% were accepted. Again, these were the exact same papers that were accepted by the same journals when the author and institution was more prestigious. Another experiment was done with a British medical journal where the experimenters created a fake paper with 9 major and 5 minor errors and gave it to reviewers. The average number of the 9 major errors each reviewer found was a little less than 3. The average number of the 5 minor errors a reviewer found was slightly less than 1. Perhaps the most humorous example would be a paper that got published in nano letters that had these nanorods or something. I don't know what these are supposed to be or why they were important, but look closely at them. This got published. Now, Nanoletters has an impact factor of 12.16, which puts it at the top 1% of journals by impact factor. So this isn't some unrepresentative backwater journal. And the only reason that this was found is because some people on the internet saw this goofy shop in a supposedly peer-reviewed article. Right, that's peer review, everyone. Now, what if the author did a better job at faking this? What if he was a little bit better at Photoshop? Well, then it probably wouldn't have been noticed, it wouldn't be retracted, and a few years later, someone trying to replicate this research would be perplexed as to why he couldn't replicate the results. And what V is saying is that Philippe Rushton should have submitted his work to these clown courts and begged for their acceptance. Then it would be legitimate, you see. There's an ocean of research on the journal system, and it all overwhelmingly points to it not working. And given that its origins were just as a metric for the government to use to figure out how to dole out research grants during the Cold War, there's no reason to just assume it was ever effective. It's not some design system that was experimentally validated, it's just a practice that emerged because the US government decided at one point to use articles published in peer-reviewed journals as a chief criteria for divvying up government money. I have an article on peer review. It goes over papers that got into major journals that were made by text spinner algorithms like SciGen, how most experiments, at least in medicine and psychology, cannot be replicated, and that most papers in cellular biology don't provide the necessary information for replication to even be attempted. Now, I know for some people this is a bitter pill to swallow, even more bitter coming from me. Because, millions of super smart people have sworn by the journals for 60 years, and you've been trained and sort of memed into thinking that anyone who questions peer review is some sort of hack, crank, or kook. And there's another problem with that, which is that most people who question peer review are quacks, cranks, and kooks. And yet, here it stands right before you. So it's time to put down the little journal trinkets. It's time to move past the custodianship of serious-faced cat ladies and move to a place of real inquiry. It's a matter of growing out of your college education. In addition to being an authority-jamming hack, V fundamentally doesn't understand the situation. And I have to say, I'm a bit surprised, because isn't he supposed to be somewhat quote-unquote based? Why then does he go full-on Professor Priesthood when talking about divergent evolution in humans?
Most of the alt-right don't have scientists among their ranks, because if they did, they would update the theories that used to be.
Well, first off, there are several. Okay, I'm in contact with one biologist, one physical anthropologist, one psychologist, one man who's on track to getting his psychology PhD, and I just met a population geneticist who is at least sympathetic to the quote-unquote alt-right. But there's no way to prove it to you, because to do so would be to reveal their identities, which would get them fired. See, that's the thing. You're confused, V. You don't understand how this works. You don't understand what's going on. James Watson, the discoverer of the double helix, was expelled from an institute that he founded because he said that the economic prospects in Africa were dubious because of the genetics of Africans. Watson had to sell his Nobel Peace Prize in order to get money to live on. Arthur Jensen at Berkeley had to have bodyguards while he was on campus. Bruce Lahn, who was doing research on a gene that regulated brain development and how it varied between populations, decided to stop his research because he was getting too much harassment and too much hate. Philippe Rushton, who was at one time the author of the most widely used Canadian psychology textbook, suddenly became an idiot and a pariah once he started doing his work on divergent human evolution. And so what V is doing is exploiting the dissident status of what is called the alt-right in order to attack it, but he's so pig ignorant that he doesn't even know that that's what he's doing. Professionals in the alt-right who get doxxed lose their jobs. And then a bunch of people ask, why can't we see hardly any professionals or any kind of scientists on the alt-right? Why is it just a bunch of anonymous people on the internet? Must be just a bunch of basement-dwelling neats. Do you see the problem with that? But these little authority games that V is playing are all ultimately irrelevant. The fact that he's focusing so hard on the RK thing.
So this video is only going to be about the RK selection. I'm not interested in any other topic for now. Because I want to take it slowly, step by step, so I can understand a few things.
Saying that that's all he wants to talk about, it's dishonest. It is a dishonesty of focus. He's focusing on something peripheral that he considers weak, something subjective, and he wants to elevate this peripheral, subjective thing to be something central about the quote-unquote alt-right. He's following in Kraut's footsteps.
Because all humans are K-type. This is the definition, right? And you can't have a lizard that becomes K-type. Because again, by the very definition, if you have the curiosity to pick up a biology book and read it, you notice the definition. Right? So you can't have a human, even if a human would have 10 babies, it's still not an R-type.
V repeats Kraut's retarded straw man of the RK argument. I don't want to relitigate this stuff, but safe it to say, V isn't really much more intelligent than Kraut. He learned a little bit from watching Kraut crash and burn, but not much. When Jean-Francois Girapier responded to V and offered a discussion, V refused, despite having called out JF in his video. So when someone who is actually credentialed in the way that V claims is required to be able to make any arguments about this, JF comes along, offers to engage him, and then V just says no. And then he cites the fact that several people wrote articles criticizing Rushton, and then proclaims that these articles tore Rushton apart.
And apparently none of the people disagreeing with Kraut's video pointed out that his book has been torn to shreds by numerous other psychologists and even biologists. For instance, you have Joseph L. Graves, who not only points that the conclusions that Mr. J. Phillips reached are wrong, he also points to the fact that the way he reached to those conclusions are wrong, and that his method is also wrong. If anyone wants to read it, I will put it up in the comment section. And Joseph L. Graves is not the only one. You also have Simon Fraser. You also have Douglas Walston. From different universities around the world, different peoples, different scientists tackled Mr. J. Philip.
This is the kind of shit BuzzFeed does, right? Points to the mere existence of some response to something and then say something like, right-wingers totally blown out by sassy intersectional feminist. Yes, publicly, academics are all going to say Rushton's work is terrible. They're all going to claim that it's all wrong, and they will behave this way whenever anyone claims that there is divergent evolution in humans. Just to get a quick preview of the kind of arguments that are leveled against Rushton, here's how Wikipedia describes the criticism of Rushton. Valencia identified the main areas of criticism as focusing on Rushton's use of race as a biological concept, a failure to appreciate the extent of variation within populations compared to that between populations, a false separation of genetics and environment, poor statistical methodology, right, that's just this, a failure to consider alternate hypotheses, and the use of unreliable and inappropriate data to draw conclusions about the relationship between brain size and intelligence. So, ending on the denial of the robust and highly replicated finding of modest correlations between human brain size and IQ. All this is old shit. All this crap are just stock arguments against divergent evolution in humans. None of this is new. Rushton and many others have been responding to these same arguments probably tens of thousands of times going back to the 1950s. Every one of these points has been litigated to death. These are the classics. They're old, dumb, bad arguments used by hacks. It is routine. It is totally predictable. These kinds of responses are all predetermined. They will always respond this way whenever anyone argues for divergent evolution in humans. They make the same arguments every time. Be they a college freshman or a PhD, they make the same trashy arguments every time. It's all ideological. It's all about defending a literally impossible position of human genetic equality. And they hold this literally impossible position because for them, it must be true in order that all of their quasi-religious social ideals have the potential to be realized. So V likes to do this disheveled Eastern European intellectual shtick, kind of like what Slavoj Žižek does, and it's an act. He is totally conventional, totally mainstream. His views are totally in line with maximizing popularity on the internet, right? A kind of anti-feminist, anti-SJW, but not racist thing.
Again, I pointed out that I have a law degree, a medical degree, a job as a microbiologist, 2 YouTube channels, and I can still play, apparently, 273 hours for the past 2 weeks. But they're probably more busy than me. This is the thing. They probably have an even busier life than I have, so I can't compete.
He claims to have a medical degree and a law degree, but I just have to ask, why do you need to beg for donations online and to help your folks out on this? And why would you spend 273 hours playing games in what Steam is calling 2 weeks? Now, that could be 20 days and it just hasn't rounded up to 3 weeks yet, but still, that would be 273 hours in 20 days at the maximum. That's 273 hours out of 480 hours, or 56.875% of the hours was spent playing video games. I don't know if V has those degrees or not, or what those degrees actually mean, but this seems dubious. Something wrong. Here's another thing that calls into question his credentials.
So this individual is a biologist for 10 years, but apparently he can't talk for himself. He wants me to talk to this JF guy.
Like, what the hell is this? What? You're not acting like someone who has the credentials you claim to have. Be a man and talk to me for yourself. What is this crap? Are you in fucking middle school? He also calls Philippe Rushton evil.
Now, it's interesting to point out, and I'm not going to pick on the fact that he's a racist, because just because he's an evil person doesn't mean necessarily that he's wrong.
See, and this is another layer to the onion of retardation that is V. He buys into conventional academic racial narratives, goes around calling so-called racists evil. Well, buddy, these racist views, these were the norm for most of Europe's history. So if they're evil, well then Europe and white people must have been evil for most of their history. SJWs basically take V's evaluation of so-called racism as evil, but unlike V, they're able to make the connection that this is how almost all white people in the past thought. And so they'll claim that most white people in history have been evil. So what is V? Well, V is, in this sense, V is a social justice warrior that's too stupid to make this connection. If you believe in quote-unquote racism and you think this racism is evil, well, by most people's standards today, the whole of European history was incredibly racist. Therefore, Europe's past is evil at root, because racist equals evil. This is so simple. This is so obvious. And the so-called skeptics, right, they're just too empty-headed to realize that this is the necessary conclusion if you believe in quote-unquote racism. All the overt anti-white stuff that the SJWs say, that's actually the logical conclusion of your belief that quote-unquote racism is evil. You're just too dumb to keep up. Now, the debate at heart is about evolution. It's about divergent evolution in humans. V, of course, doesn't want to go down that road. He just wants to linger on the minor Rushton RK thing. Nobody had talked about the RK thing in so long that when Kraut brought it up in his video, there were a bunch of people like Braving Ruin and Tara McCarthy who went, what? Because they didn't even know what this was. They had never heard about it. Going back to the RK life history stuff, they're not separate things. And I'll just read a quote from David Resnick that was posted on Wikipedia that I think explains this a lot better than I could. Quote, "The distinguishing feature of the R and K selection paradigm was the focus on density-dependent selection as the important agent of selection of organisms' life histories. This paradigm was challenged as it became clear that other factors, such as age-specific mortality, could provide a more mechanistic causative link between an environment and an optimal life history. The R and K selection paradigm was replaced by a new paradigm that focused on age-specific mortality. This new life history paradigm has matured into one that uses age-structured models as a framework to incorporate many of the themes important to the RK paradigm." So it sounds like it's not some hard break, which makes V's concerns ring a little bit hollow here.
Why do you not point out at all that the RK model is outdated? Because maybe someone wants to read on it, so why are you making people who listen to your videos read outdated theories? Why don't you point out that a life history paradigm is the new updated scientific consensus, and we have used this for over 30 years now?
If you had talked to FG, he would have been able to teach you that RK was just a form of life histories theory. And in fact, modern life histories theories haven't so much as abandoned RK as added to it to an extent that they kind of superseded it. There's nothing wrong with using an older paradigm. It doesn't make any of the data collected by Rushton invalid or incorrect. The RK paradigm wasn't debunked or shown to be incorrect or anything, it was just superseded. But remember, the alt-right didn't bring up any of this RK stuff. Any comments on Kraut's videos were comments made by some bunch of rando, normie alt-righters not the people who write the blogs, not the people who make the videos, but just sort of random commenter people, immediately responding to Kraut on a very peripheral topic that hasn't been relevant to race realism in around 15 years. And V has a bug up his butt about why the alt-right never mentioned the responses to Rushton, or never mentioned that Rushton was using an older paradigm. Hey asshole, none of us were talking about this at all until Kraut brought it up. And now you're giving the third degree to some rando YouTube commenters and indicting the alt-right for not addressing these garbage criticisms about this thing that we were literally not talking about at all. But hey, maybe we should cut V some slack, as he is a doctor, lawyer, microbiologist after all, who spends around 12 hours a day playing video games according to his Steam account. But despite that, he still finds the time to make these great videos for us. So maybe he's just sleep deprived, and he just forgot that it's Kraut who made a huge fucking deal about some work by Philippe Rushton from 22 years ago that most people on the alt-right have never even heard of. Kraut brought up RK because it looked weak to him and he thought he could body it, and then use that bodying of RK as a credibility step to attacking the more essential arguments about race realism. Now, it totally failed. It totally backfired because Kraut's a total moron, okay? And V is trying to do damage control. But V forgets that this RK shit is only being talked about because it's what Kraut chose, okay? And because Kraut has been so royally ass blasted on this, it's hard to remember that it was Kraut who was the one who brought this up in the first place, right? And we're just responding to the stuff he's saying, okay? We never forwarded Rushton's RK stuff on anything. We're just reacting to you, okay? We're just reacting to the stuff that you're saying, okay? And V is acting like we're the ones who are making some sort of positive case for this and that we need to preempt and give all the qualifiers for Rushton's RK theory or anything. We're not pushing any of this. Nobody's pushing the RK stuff. We're just responding to you, reacting to you, all right? But the thing is, you got blasted so hard that you forget that you were the ones who brought it up in the first place, right? You're just losing just so bad.